what value does each generation have that we need to leverage while minimizing the risks and the judgments that each generation holds against the other.
This is Big Four and More, and I'm your host, Drew Leifheit, bringing you insightful interviews connected to the global consultancy sector. In today's work environment, where AI disruption, remote work, and cross cultural teams are transforming how consultants work, disagreement is inevitable. But how we handle different viewpoints can determine whether a team thrives or fizzles out. And that's where today's guest comes in. Bryant Galindo is a certified mediator, executive coach, and author of The New Middle, Connecting Heart and Mind to Collaboratively Disagree. Through his company Collabs HQ, he guides founders, executives, and business teams through high stakes disputes, partnership breakdowns, and complex decision making, all with a unique approach that combines emotional intelligence and clear, grounded communication. Be sure to stick around for Bryant's top 3 tips on resolving workplace conflicts in high pressure consulting environments. Bryant Galindo of Collabs HQ, welcome to Big Four and More.
Hi, Drew. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. Thanks for being here.
Mm.
Could you, when you're on a plane, what do you typically tell, someone you've just met about yourself?
Mm. Yeah, if I keep it pretty simple and basic, I just say I'm the type of guy that gets in the middle of big conflicts and helps you have the clarity and calm to get to the other side of it. And usually people will be like, "Whoa, what does that mean?" Right? And I was like, "Well, in more layman's terms, I work as a mediator and executive coach. I either will mediate and facilitate that difficult conversation, or I'll coach you on the best practices and tools to help you do that yourself."
Wow. A lot of people try to avoid conflict, of course. And
Yeah.
how did you find yourself getting into that?
Well, I was a paralegal before I was a mediator. And the good thing about the law firm that I was working at was that one of the partners was really fond of mediation. And he knew my aspirations for law school and basically was like, look, if you want to be involved in these mediations and just kind of sit in, if you want an hour or two to just sit in there, please do it. And he was really gracious in that way. So it was really helpful. And basically, what helped me in that was being able to sit in on those mediations and realize, wow, maybe what I like about the law is not necessarily the fighting, but the resolution. And maybe what I really want is to be that guy in the middle, helping parties basically negotiate, get to that resolution. And it made me realize, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't go to law school. Maybe I can find a graduate program in negotiation and conflict resolution, which is what I did. And I went to Columbia and basically got an education in that, and also then got an apprenticeship with the federal government as a mediator, which basically started my career.
Well, congratulations. I am curious, considering what you do, what's your take on, the modern world and business? Is disagreement to, kind of par for the course in this day and age?
Yeah, I think, back to the comment around avoidance, a lot of corporations, consulting companies, disagreement is viewed as something that's negative, something to avoid. And what they don't realize is that there's a lot of research that shows that positive, healthy disagreement can actually lead to better results, stronger innovation, and also stronger teams. Because first and foremost, we're people, right? Yes, we embody a role. Yes, we're professionals. But at the end of the day, we're people. And sometimes what disagreements are about is about leveraging those human aspects of who we are and creating that psychological safety that then allows teams to bring out their best ideas. Because if Joe Schmo over there is too afraid to bring up something, that might actually be helpful, then really are you getting the best out of your teams? Most likely not. And so what you really want to do is learn how to leverage the positive aspects of conflict while minimizing the negative aspects, which is like the personalization, the positional attacks, the he said, she said, right? The blaming, but more so around the environment of like, okay, what is it that we really want here? Why is it that we want it? And what's the best solution for the team, not necessarily the individual?
Mm. Brian, could you share a little bit with us? How does your involvement start?
Mm.
Are you approaching companies that, you think might have problems, or do they have problems and they say, oh, "Hey, we need somebody like Bryant."
Yeah, so there's two things. So my client acquisition channels, first and foremost, there's a lot of inbound marketing. So one section of my clientele are founders, business leaders that reach out to me because they see my content online talking about their specific problems. And those types of clients are usually mediation clients that sometimes convert into coaching clients. And I'll pitch them my mediation process. They'll say yes or no, right? And then we go through it. The other subsection of my clients, and this is something that's really new for me, is getting into like international consulting work. I am part of panels from different organizations that are involved in international work, and then they'll send me clients. So, in one example, one client right now, they came to me through one of these panels that they were looking specifically for a Spanish-speaking mediator that was also bilingual. And they wanted someone with Latin American experience, someone that was in a specific time zone, actually, like Los Angeles, which I'm in Los Angeles, so that worked in my favor, and also had experience in international development work, which I do have as well. And so they basically referred me. We pitched them me as a person, and they said yes. So, it's kind of a mixture, especially because I'm also trying to get more into the international consulting or international conflict resolution world. And those clients I'm finding through the panels, but then the private clients, like the startups, the business leaders, they come to me directly.
Mm. Your experience makes me think a little bit about sort of international teams,
Hmm.
remote work,
Hmm.
potential cultural misunderstandings. How much do they play a role in, the disagreements that emerge?
Well, a lot. So in one team that I was working with, it was a co-CEO team, actually. It was two co-CEOs, and one individual was Latin American and the other was not. And even though this was a Latin American company, they were finding that the individual who was not Latin American had a certain type of posturing communication style that was butting heads, which in the beginning of the business worked really well, right? He was kind of aggressive, a little assertive. He would go after what you want. But now that the business was somewhat stable and was having investment, they were finding that style somewhat at odds with the kind of collaborative needs of the business while they were scaling. And so when I came in and worked with the one of the co-CEOs through a coaching modality, the first thing I had him do was actually read a book called The Culture Map. And in the culture map, it talks about how different countries have different communication styles. And so we were really trying to hammer that point of like, what is your style that's based on your culture and what is theirs, and what's the happy medium here? Because obviously you need to continue moving forward. And we did a mapping exercise that basically helped him see that while also then co-creating the strategies that he needed to help basically maneuver this person into a place where he could then work with them in a more effective manner.
Mm. Sometimes beliefs in a culture can be so rigid. Has
Mhm.
there been anything that you've run into that is just a non-starter?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think from my experience, I've worked with a lot of Latin American leaders. And I think if any of your listeners or people who are watching this know, like Latin America, there's something called machismo, which is just like kind of very like masculine oriented mentality. And that's something that becomes kind of difficult, especially I remember one female executive director that I was working with from a nonprofit who was having a hard time managing the machismo kind of culture of her board. And they were creating a lot of tension points between her and the board. And she was like, what can I do? Right? What can I say if not to come off as too aggressive as a woman? And so I think when we talk about non-starters culturally, it's kind of looking at those things, right? Limited beliefs are just those beliefs that we've inherited that we don't question. And at least in this context, people don't question the machismo-ness, until they have to. And this executive director was having to do that and then also find ways to not necessarily fight it, but to maybe work around it or realign with it. And I think language has a really strong, powerful anchor when it comes to navigating these like non-starters, because how you frame it will ultimately be how you go about navigating it.
Mm, mm. And in this day and age, would you say, are there a handful maybe of sort of typical types of disagreements that you see? Um,
Mm.
what's your experience?
Yeah, so there's a lot of personality disagreements. I think that's first and foremost, right? You see someone, maybe you don't like them, you start calling them names in your head, and then you then project that out. The issue with those types of disagreements is that they then get projected onto maybe task disagreements or other kinds of conflicts that maybe are resource or decision-making conflicts. And what I find is that people bundle all of those because they want to prove their point,
Mm,
right? They want to be right. And my job when I come in is to somewhat do a really fast analysis of the conflict to just see what the presenting issues are. But always inevitably, Drew, what the presenting issues are not really what the actual conflict is about. And so as I start parsing it all out and trying to figure out, okay, what's really going on here, it's usually the personality conflicts that are the low-hanging fruit, which is like, okay, I have a framework called the disagreement spiral that I show clients. And in this framework, what's really powerful is that it shows when you're in a disagreement and you're escalating, the personality conflicts become more because you're trying to find ways of kind of putting the person down, right, proving your point. But what's also cool is that the disagreement spiral shows a tit for tat dynamic. You most likely have engaged this person in such a way that is then feeding the dynamic and feeding the disagreement. So if you can acknowledge your part in it and take accountability for it, something magical happens, which is that you not only de-escalate the disagreement, but then you basically beget more compassion, more empathy, more understanding because you're in that same place too. And so I would say that if people really are having conflicts or disagreements in their workplace, start with you first. Start with how are you aiding and abetting that conflict? And then how are you also projecting out personality traits that might just be your way of making you feel better about your own issues?
mm. It really does sound as if maybe a lot of the stakeholders kind of forget the notion of know thyself.
Mm,
I suppose when they get into such a situation, not to mention, it sounds to me as if what you're saying is that so many of these conflicts that emerge do have to do with someone's kind of emotional background or
mm.
you know maybe
Yeah.
both parties.
Yeah.
What's it like for you to I mean, it sounds amazing that you're able to kind of disentangle and
Mhm.
make something positive out of this. What is that like for you?
Hmm. I over the years in the beginning, I was very involved with my clients. I think I even took it personally if they didn't get to resolution. Now I'm much more detached. I think it's just a more healthier place to be. I'm like, I'm not here to advocate for any one side. I'm here to advocate for a process, right? Which is that you're engaging me to help you navigate this. If you don't get to the other side with the resolution, maybe that's the best thing possible. Because I've had people come back to me like a few weeks later to be like, okay, we sat with everything and we want to re-engage. And sometimes people just need that. So for me, I think if anything, I always feel like it's an honor when people feel like I'm the right person to bring in to help them navigate these types of disputes, right? There's a humility there that I would think is also something that's really important to me because at the end of the day, people are people. And I think most people are trying their best. But people also get triggered. Their emotional history comes up, and what feels really real for them is not something that's up for debate, right? In my role, like your emotions are your emotions, you can have that. It's really, to me, the secondary question of what do you want to do with that? Right? Do you want to stay kind of like a petulant child and fight to your right, or do you want to rise as the mature adult and actually try to figure out something where you can live and maybe even be happy with the result?
Yeah, because it sounds like things could really stall if
Hmm.
there's
Yes.
just no consensus. What about that Could you kind of characterize the cost of unresolved disagreement at
Oof. Yeah,
enterprises?
there's stress, productivity issues, right? Teams suffer. And man, if it's also an issue of maybe even bigger, like harassment, discrimination, you then open yourself up to legal liability. So a lot of these little things, in the beginning might just be little personality issues, little things that can be handled. But once they arise to harassment, a toxic work environment claim, then you get into the legal arena. And I think what some corporations or consulting companies try to do is try to frame mediation or conflict resolution work as a preventative measure, right? A proactive measure before things get too bad because, teams will suffer, morale will go down, team cohesion, and those are all of the basic building blocks of what make teams great. And so if they can really learn to identify when issues are starting to spiral, that's when you can really have the right ingredients for early conflict resolution.
Mhm. I apologize for injecting a bit of political background into this, but I'm
Mm,
wondering what you're hearing and seeing and experiencing in terms of uh, policies such as diversity, equity, and inclusion at
mm,
companies. Obviously, there's been some strong arming that these policies must no longer be pursued at some companies. And I'm wondering just kind of what your take is on the whole thing and what the future is.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that, at least in the political climate in the United States, DEI has become the boogeyman, right? That they're somehow weaponizing, which to me, diversity, inclusion, and equity are good things. Don't we want a diverse team to be able to acknowledge and harness different viewpoints? Don't we want to create a table where people can all come to? It's not saying not to have merit, not to have qualifications, but it is opening the door for different viewpoints, different people's walks of life to come in. And, at least with some of the organizations that I sit on panels with, they've had to revamp and rebrand some of their DEI efforts, into like organizational development or organizational resilience. And I think what we need to really have is an actual conversation as to like why was DEI even needed in the first place? Why is it that women earn less than men when they when they're doing the same work? Why is it that minorities aren't promoted at the same levels as others? And I think the systematic issues are the things that we really need to be looking at, not just some DEI boogeyman.
Right. Could you talk a little bit about how cognitive biases and unconscious factors that distort things show up?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question too, because I think back to what you said around limiting beliefs, right? I think they kind of work hand in hand. Cognitive biases feed our limiting beliefs as well as vice versa. And so when you have a cognitive bias, what it basically does, it short circuits your brain, right? It's giving you a known pattern and it's basically saying if I think all these types of individuals are X, Y, and Z, then I'm going to put that boilerplate onto all of them. So what it really does is that it creates like a limited perspective. And sometimes what I have to do, especially in my mediations with founders, is open that perspective up, kind of challenge it. And the way that I do it is I sometimes allow people to just talk, right? And if they're just talking and you're asking questions, usually they will work themselves in a circle. And so I have this way of just kind of bringing up like, hey, Tom, you said this like about 5 minutes ago. How does that kind of compute with what you just said now over here? Can you kind of rectify that for me? And that is kind of my way of calling out the bias without necessarily calling it that, so that the person themselves can be with their words in a non-judgmental place and actually see it. Sometimes it does have a positive effect. Other times people get angry because they're like, whoa, 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 you're kind of calling me out here. But that's further from the truth, right? I'm literally just reflecting their own words. And so basically, what I think cognitive biases do is just they limit us to the realm of possibility. And I also think it, from a neuropsychological standpoint, our brains have created these kind of biases to kind of also help us. but then at some point they start to hinder us.
Mm. I love the concept of vulnerability in your book, and
Mhm.
using it as a tool to approach some of these issues. Why do you think it's still taboo in, many corporate cultures?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess my question to you first would be what does vulnerability mean to you?
Mm. Well, I guess it kind of gets at a lot of what we've been talking about. Just that, I think that, or in my experience, human beings are, don't necessarily decide one way or another rationally.
Hmm.
It totally, or many times has a lot to do with what they've experienced in the past, maybe even,
Mhm.
how they grew up.
Hmm. Yeah, and even just talking about that can be vulnerable, right? And I think at least in corporate culture that's still very like masculine oriented, hierarchical, vulnerability is seen as a feminine thing. It's seen as something that you're crying, right? You're just like in shambles. It's hard to hear. And people are very uncomfortable with that because they're uncomfortable with their own vulnerability. So the minute you can learn to be comfortable with your own emotions and your own vulnerability, it just is. It's just like, wow, that's just your humanity. But organizations haven't learned, I think, in my opinion, and maybe this is kind of the sea change that's happening, of how to leverage that in a way that's still healthy, right? To be vulnerable isn't to be crying over the desk over something that happened. It's to say, wow, I'm really confused right now about the decision that you're making for the team. I want to understand it better, right? Like even just the word confused is like a vulnerable word. And so I think what I try to do and practice and what is kind of the essence of my book is that by bringing vulnerability forward, you're basically saying, hey, see me, right? And see me from a grounded place, not from a place of like the broken child, like crying on the floor, but also as someone who has their needs, right, their own interests, and also is trying to bring that forward. I think there's a passage in my book that talks about in American Sign Language that the sign for vulnerability is the Superman kind of opening the shirt and to reveal the Superman costume underneath.
Mm,
Because it means like we need to see that, right? We need to see your heart. We need to see who you are to be vulnerable. And people, back to what I said previously, just aren't comfortable with their own vulnerability. So they see anyone else's vulnerability as like suspect, maybe even distrustful, and they don't know what to do with that. So I think we also just need more kind of maybe training, more examples and role models of what that looks like in a healthy way so that we can start creating new ways of doing that in the workplace.
mm. Oh, that's a really beautiful anecdote that you shared with us about Superman
Hmm.
breaking out the heart. That's really
Yeah.
cool. Um, if we could dip a little bit into generations
Hmm.
and the kinds of gaps that emerge. I know somebody, maybe in my family, I'm not going to name any names, that works with millennials and Gen X, and oh
Hmm.
yeah, there sometimes there are some problems that emerge, and I'm wondering, what kinds of generation gaps, cultural differences, and things, how do they work into this whole area of sort of business conflicts?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, there's a lot of misunderstanding between the generations and a lot of projections of judgment both ways, right? Because one of the things that I really value is that my mentor, who's been my mentor now for almost 10 years, is a boomer. And the thing that I really enjoy about our collaboration, is that, there are things that I just know, having grown up with the internet, that I take for granted that have a lot of value to her. And because she's just much older, she's walked through life, done so much in her life, she has a wisdom that I don't have just by being younger. And so I think when it comes to business conflicts, we need to take that perspective, what value does each generation have that we need to leverage while minimizing the risks and the judgments that each generation holds against the other? And stop trying to make a square fit into like a circle. Stop trying to bring the work environment of the boomer generation into like the millennial mindset because it's not going to work, and vice versa too. But I think there's something really beautiful that happens when you're able to acknowledge the differences, but still find a meeting point where you can say, yes, we agree. And at least with some of the conflicts that I've helped navigate, especially between like boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, Gen Z, it's about setting the stage for just trust, mutual respect and understanding, and knowing that everyone's going to bring their special sauce to this meal, so to speak. And my job is always to like really be that cook, to see what ingredients does each generation have. But, one consulting engagement that I had, I came in as an outsider, and there was an individual there who had been there for 25 years, close to retirement. She was a senior consultant there, and she just saw me with just so much distrust. Like I was maybe going to take her job, why did we have to hire someone outside? Like she could have done it better. And the first time I ended up doing a presentation, she was just stink eyeing me the entire time, like asking me difficult questions, trying to prove I was wrong, like, kind of taking my measure, so to speak. And what I ended up having to do was actually talk to my contact and say, what's going on here? I don't understand like why this individual is giving me so much pushback. She clued me in. She's like, well, she's been here for so long. She's about to retire. Maybe she doesn't feel that she has enough value anymore. And that was kind of like the little light bulb that went off. And I was like, oh, this person just wants to be seen. They want to be acknowledged for all of the hard work that they've done. So I ended up bringing them into the project and saying, look, you have something I don't. You have institutional knowledge. You've been here for 25 years. I need that as part of this engagement. So I think there will be certain touch points where I would love to lean on you and hear what you have to say and really like work on from a collaborative place to make this better. And you should have seen her, Drew. She perked up. She was like, oh, I have something to say and do. Great. Like how can we work, And I think that kind of lens, that kind of mindset is what's missing because it's so easy to just see what's wrong instead of seeing what's right with the situation and really leaning into those characteristics.
Mhm. Yeah, it seems like so much of this stuff is just about you know, achieving understanding with
Hmm.
individuals. Of course, our show is called Big Four and More, and I was hoping to get in a question about international consultancies and some of the pressures that they're feeling. So I'm wondering,
Hmm.
let's say in terms of, for example, artificial intelligence and the pressures that it's putting on the global consultancy business. What kind of capacity do you see in such situations for disagreement?
Mm. Well, definitely AI is changing the landscape, right? It's making people redundant. It's literally a changing force, and people still don't know, at least in the international consultancy world, like how to really leverage it in a way that feels authentic and in a way that actually does more than maybe just administrative work or creative work. When I was working with one international consultancy in Latin America, AI actually helped us really work faster because we were putting together different learning content and different proposals, really just trying to create programs really fast. And so when it came to conflict, what I saw was kind of fact checking the AI, right? Kind of like making sure that what they were producing was of quality and being transparent with your use of AI. I think that's the other thing is some people still try to hide it, right? Or say like, oh, okay, not it's not something we're really using. But the fact of the matter is people are using it. And I think we need to have a bigger conversation around that as to how to still lend legitimacy to our work. But some teams love it, some teams hate it, and the teams that hate it, I think they're the ones who are creating conflict around it just by the very nature of how to implement it and how to execute with it.
Mm. Putting you in the hot seat, Bryant, could you give us three quick tips for resolving
Mm.
workplace conflicts right now?
Mm. Yeah, well, look, these tips may sound kind of basic, but honestly, they're really, really great, which first and foremost, prime your mind for curiosity. And I say prime your mind because before you even enter into a conflict, you should get into the right mindset for how you're going to navigate it. And part of that is around your framing. Do you want to win or do you want to understand? Literally ask yourself that. Because if you want to win, your posture is going to be much more kind of forward versus your posture when it's more understanding is going to be more question oriented, right? You're going to want to ask questions, which kind of leads me to my second tip, which is ask open-ended questions. Ask to understand. Ask something as simple as like, I understand that that's really important to you right now. Can you help me understand why that is? And let them talk. I think there's such a big tendency of people to fill in spaces, and they don't like silence, but that silence is the special sauce, I would say. That's where you can feel whether or not they're anxious, right? Or they're nervous. You can see it in their body language. And that would be my third tip, which is look at a person's body language, even if it is virtual. Are they looking to the side all the time? Are their arms crossed, right? Like, do they kind of close their chest? These are all unconscious signs to tell you whether or not the way you're navigating the conversation is actually effective or not. And if you find that it's not effective, just disengage, take a pause, because the things you say when you're in a triggered state actually lead to more damage versus when you're in a responsive state. So if I could leave the listeners, people who are watching this with anything, it's like really clue in into like your own body when you're in conflict and come at it from a mindset of curiosity with open-ended questions so that hopefully you get the information you need that will help you move forward in a more better way.
Those are great tips. Thank you so much. And finally, Bryant, if kind of some of these issues have rung true for those out there watching,
Mhm.
and maybe some of these issues have cropped up at their organization. Could you talk a little bit about how you might help an organization navigate a high stakes disagreement?
Yeah, so there's different ways that I work. So obviously, from a mediator standpoint, I do mediation. So we can come in from a crisis point and basically just mediate whatever's going on. If it's more of a systemic issue, cultural issue, I can also come in as a consultant and literally build out a framework for how to like leverage these conflicts early on and really detect them and even do coaching with specific members of the team that maybe either need to mediate themselves or need to have a different way or frameworks for how to navigate these types of conflicts. So it really is kind of whether or not it's like very targeted via mediation or something more systemic where we have to build out like a infrastructure for how to basically acknowledge these things early on and also help managers, team leaders kind of mediate their own conflicts.
You're watching Big Four and More, and we've been speaking to Bryant Galindo. He's the author of The New Middle. Bryant, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Drew. Appreciate it.